Welcome to everyone to the beginning of this new series here at Deep Vellum. My name is Lindsay King. I am the Director of Development at Deep Vellum, and I want to give a special welcome to first-time attendees of a Deep Vellum event, which I think many of you are. If you are new to us, Deep Vellum is a nonprofit literary center and an independent publishing house located in Dallas. We publish books by writers from all over the world and also here in Dallas and Texas more broadly. And we host a lot of literary events, including obviously virtual events. So we hope to see many of your faces at upcoming events. You can learn more about our work by visiting our website, of course, deepvellum.org, and I will drop that into the chat box into the comments on Facebook. We would really love to see you guys again. So tonight is our first event in a new virtual event series, and we're really excited to kick it off. This is Accessibility in the Literary Arts, and of course this event is on dyslexia. The series itself will address vital questions about how to make the literary arts accessible and welcoming to people from all communities. So we'll be talking about race and gender, disability, and a variety of other issues over the coming months. So before I introduce our topic and our speakers tonight, I do want to let you know that our next event in this series will be a conversation with BIPOC disabled writers who will be talking about the future of the literary arts and writing from their perspective as members of that community. We don't actually have a date confirmed for this, but it will likely be late September, early October, and hopefully you guys will get an email to your inbox about this. We also have one more event next week that's on Wednesday at 1 p.m. We're calling it a lunch break event. Our marketing and sales director, Sarah, who's with us tonight, will be chatting with Richard Santos, who is a Texas writer whose debut novel, Trust Me, came out earlier this year. And that event you can actually catch on our Instagram account. Will be live at Deep Vellum. So I think that's about it for the introductions, and I'm really happy to begin tonight's program. We are super thrilled to have three amazing panelists tonight who will talk about reading and literary arts for people with dyslexia. So I'm going to do very brief introductions, and then I'll let them describe themselves a little in a little bit more detail here in a minute. We have with us Jasmine Dean, who is the Executive Director of Celebrate Dyslexia, an organization that works with parents of dyslexic children to help them navigate the educational system to get the best resources for their kids. We also have with us Tiffany Sunday, who is a Texas writer and a dyslexia activist, who wrote How Dyslexics Will Rule the Future and Dyslexia's Competitive Edge. And finally, we have Winn, who is also a Texas writer and dyslexia activist. He is the author of many children's books, as well as the book, Raising a Child with Dyslexia, What Every Parent Needs to Know. So I have two reminders. First of all, this is a pay what you can event. So all the proceeds that you donate tonight will go directly to the writers on this panel. And I'm about to add a link in the chat that you can sort of click on and go right to donate, and those will go directly to panelists. And secondly, we have some book giveaways tonight. Books by Tiffany and Don will be giving away. I will be announcing the winners of those at the end of the event tonight. So I think we'll just dive right into the questions. We're going to do some pre-prepared questions here as a panel conversation, and then we'll do an open Q&A from anyone who's viewing, from audience members. If you have questions as we go, feel free to just drop those into the chat box or on Facebook comments, and I will read those aloud at the end for the Q&A. Thank you guys so much for being here. And thank you, especially to the panelists, of course. So just to jump to the questions, I wonder, before we get into some of the specific issues, could you all tell us briefly about your backgrounds and about how you got interested in advocating on the issue of dyslexia?
I guess I could start.
Sure.
Yeah. Some of you may be familiar with that show, What Not to Wear, that British show. Some of you may have watched it. Well, the producers of the show, What Not to Wear, ever make an educational version for dyslexics, my story would be a prime example of what not to do with a young dyslexic student. But in spite of having gotten off to a very rough start, I've learned to manage, I've managed to learn to live with my dyslexia and have learned to use my experience to help others. And so I look forward to sharing some of what I've learned with all of you this evening.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, do you want to, I'm sort of looking at the order of you guys on my screens.
I'm Tiffany Sunday. I'm dyslexic. I'm probably also ADHD, probably have, as I call it, dyslexia is like down buffet. You just walk down and get a little bit of dyslexia, a little bit of ADHD. You probably toss in a few other things. But I have been an entrepreneur since I was 12. I think it's part of our DNA. We just have to solve problems, create or create businesses. And so started doing starting businesses, and then did a couple of gigs in the corporate America where I launched, businesses internally or created new products. I had the opportunity to work with a fellow dyslexic and a fellow Aggie that we did an investor funded startup. We started, writing notes on basically a notepad in Starbucks down in Uptown. And then, we scaled it with 2 interns, myself and my son and Cole. So that was an interesting experience to truly go from concept to market. I've launched 2 other companies. My son and I, he's also a freshman Aggie, so I always have to go whoop. And he and I have done 2 businesses as well. I think it's innate in dyslexics. I think that was the reason why I put together the 2015 TEDx talk that I never correctly pronounce, because I will say my own title backwards. It's just Dyslexia 2.0. You can search it on YouTube, because I'm not attempting to say the rest of the title because I'll always say it backwards. And then that was a part of the Dyslexia's competitive edge as well. So I do advocate because it's important. And I'm here mainly for the adults because we've come so far with the K-12. I know Don and Jasmine continue to carry the torch, but I also know from experience from TEDx and my books that there are so many adult dyslexics that reach out and saying, we really still need to have inclusion in the corporate setting or just out there, because most of the services stop. I mean, once you graduate college, there's nothing else there. So that's part of the advocacy. I can't even say this. I don't decode well. That was the birth or the genesis behind how dyslexics rule the future. So that's kind of the nutshell.
Thank you. And Jasmine?
I'm Jasmine Dean with Celebrate Dyslexia, and I guess our journey with dyslexia began a couple of years ago when we learned that our oldest son had dyslexia. So my husband and I are fairly educated. We had never heard the word. We didn't really know what it meant, and we really were desperate to find places to go to learn about it. A lot of the places that we went to had more of a negative theme in how to deal with it. And my son would come with us and he would just tell us that he didn't want to be that person. And so we started learning about the strength-based model, and we really saw our child as a whole person and didn't want to only talk about the STAR test and frequency and the frequency tests and how fast he could read. We wanted to be able to enjoy his childhood. So through a series of events, Celebrate Dyslexia was born just so we could do that. And we could build a community where we could focus on the strengths that our children have, seeing that there are so many dyslexic people out there. There are so many parents of dyslexic children that are just learning about their own dyslexia in the process. And so we have these years with them where we can enjoy them, learn more about dyslexia, help them advocate for themselves, and hopefully do it well and impact this conversation and this narrative so that when they have children, they're not having the same conversations in school with administrators.
Thank you guys so much. I'm really excited that the 3 of you are here because I think it kind of covers dyslexia from different aspects. So as a parent, as people who have dyslexia, for children, and for adults. So I hope this conversation can sort of cover different bases. I really want to start at the very beginning, since we have different people attending tonight, some people who are really attuned to dyslexia issues and some people for whom this is a new conversation. So I'm wondering, Dawn, maybe I could turn to you for this. What is dyslexia and what is it not?
It's a very good question. There's a lot of misconception about what dyslexia is and isn't today. In a nutshell, and I'll be very brief, dyslexia is a mechanical problem. Now, some people may be scratching their head, mechanical problem? What do you mean by that? Well, our brains are hardwired for speech. But unlike speech, our brains are not hardwired for the written language. See, the written language is a form of code. It involves connecting those little abstract marks on a page, the alphabet, to the spoken word. And so the written word must be decoded. It's a mechanical process. And a problem with the dyslexic brain is our brains are not wired to be able to correctly, automatically decode the written word. And so it involves having to develop workarounds to do that. It's like having a dial-up network in a high-speed world. Decoding is never automatic and it'll always take extra time. And as Tiffany mentioned, you know, it's a lifelong problem. It's something that we always have. We just learn to compensate to cope with it. Now, concerning what dyslexia isn't, and again, it's just a couple items to be brief. Dyslexia is not a thinking disorder, and it's not an intelligence problem. Dyslexia is not due to laziness or a lack of motivation. And again, it's not a phase you can outgrow. All of these topics are discussed in detail in my book, Raising a Child with Dyslexia. But the important thing to remember with all dyslexics, it has nothing to do with intelligence or motivation.
Thank you so much. Jasmine or Tiffany, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I would like to also, you know, for any parents here, that you learn to develop and have a relationship with your dyslexia. I wouldn't have guessed that as a child, but it's like having a marriage. It's like being in a long friendship or a band. You have got to figure out a way to work with it. Some days on the dyslexia, we do not get along together. And then some days the brilliance just overwhelms me almost to tears. And it's everything. I also think that dyslexia is very elusive sometimes. You know, some days your brain's, you know, right on it, everything's firing at all cylinders, and the next day it doesn't want to do anything but go play. So I think there's a lot of things that, you know, decoding, reading, spelling, there's so many components to dyslexia. It's sometimes even hard to tease out. But I also say it's a whole body experience because it can impact you in different ways. Like I can go to the grocery store and buy the wrong salad dressing 3 times in a row. For my brain just cannot figure it out. Or I can't spell entrepreneurship and I've written it 1,000,000 times.
Well, I will add also that there is a law that defines dyslexia in our country that was passed in 2018. And I'm actually going to read it to make sure that I get it right, because like Tiffany just said, I've read this a ton of times, but I'm still going to mess up. So I'm just going to read it to make sure that I don't slip up on anything. The term dyslexia means an unexpected, and that is really important to highlight. It's an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader, most commonly caused by a difficulty in the phonological processing, which affects the ability of an individual to speak, read, and spell. So that's called the First Step Act, and it was passed in 2018, which a lot of people don't know that there's an actual law defining dyslexia in the United States.
Yeah, I had no idea. That's really interesting. I would like to turn, I'm thinking about a conversation actually Jasmine and I had when we first got in touch, when Jasmine started bringing up all of these places in our lives where we read that I just hadn't thought about as potentially being a challenge for people with dyslexia. I'm actually wondering if I can turn to you, Tiffany. Could you talk about some of the unexpected challenges for people with dyslexia in the workplace and in the community?
It's just every day. You're having your boss walk in and say, you know, can you read this highly technical document? I know Dawn and I had a conversation about it. It's reading, but it's also interpreting what you read. You can read it a couple of times. The other thing is you can take it literal, or someone will say something, and you know, dyslexia is, again, it's a whole body thing where you're reading something, you're reading under pressure, you're reading to make sure you're grasping it. I don't read every word. It took me forever to learn to read. I value reading. I try not to get emotional, but to me, that is probably the most sacred thing I have, is the ability to read now, but it took so long to get there. But you have to think about everything you look, how many times we read on text messaging. Social media can be a mind, you know, if you're in marketing, can you imagine trying to make sure you're reading and then responding it correctly? Everything has gone digital. It's there in the public eye. And so, you know, I actually put my tweets in Grammarly before I put them online. Everything gets funneled through Grammarly before I go and put it, you know, publicly, or I have it read to me, because you don't know. It takes time. And so I think, you know, I'll share not so much just my stories too real quick, but, you know, all the emails I've gotten from professionals, they're running, you know, anywhere from 5 to 15 apps a day, spending an extra 5 hours or more just compensating in their jobs, especially if they're in engineering and science, anything that, or, you know, law profession, you know, anything that's going to demand a lot of reading, a lot of processing, thinking. You know, we have to kind of touch it, you know, have to read it, we have to talk about it, you know, we have to kind of, you know, engage with it, because like Dawn said, you know, it's very different to our brains. So your obstacles are many, or even just making sure you read the signs correctly in the buildings, you know, you're not going the wrong way, lefts and rights, you know, it's so many things. Does that help? I mean, I could list, I know Dawn and Jasmine can throw, I mean, it's not just 1 or 2. I mean, you can list 100 pretty quick.
Yeah, Jasmine and Dawn, do you guys have something to add to that? Other thoughts?
Yeah, I understand exactly what Tiffany is saying. I've been in a workplace that involved, required a lot of reading when I worked for the state of Texas. And when the legislature met and my director came in with a bill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and said, I need to have this, you know, summed up for me before the end of the day, my eyes would gloss over. Yes, I can do it, but I can't do it in that amount of time. And so it caused a lot of anxiety, because it takes extra time to be able to read and decipher, not just to read. I could read through it and not understand it, but to be able to read and have the time to be able to understand what I'm reading, that takes time. And so in the workplace especially, being able to have that accommodation, not being ashamed, to be able to let the workplace know that, hey, I'm dyslexic, not being ashamed of it, and having the support you need and the extra time you need to be able to do tasks like that, I think is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think even since we've been having these conversations, I've realized what my emails are like and how text heavy they are, you know? And I know that's not the case for our email culture in every profession, but I've certainly been thinking twice about the emails that I've been sending people since we've been in conversation. I'd like to ask one more really short background question here, kind of basics question that I know is itself the subject of many panels, but just for a little bit more background. People with dyslexia often struggle with sibling conditions as well. And I wonder if, and I'll turn to you, Dawn, about this, if you could tell us just very briefly about those conditions and how they're related to dyslexia.
Absolutely. One thing that I do want to start out by saying is not all dyslexics are alike. Dyslexia can be from mild to severe, can just affect the ability to decode reading, or it could have one or more of its many sibling conditions. So what are those sibling conditions? Well, one of them is dyscalculia, and I have 3 of these. Dyscalculia is one of them. Dyscalculia is difficulty with math, numbers, sequencing, and directional matters. So having trouble with directions, learning sequences, difficulty following instructions, remembering more than one step at a time, inability to remember multiplication tables, which I still can't do, trouble remembering the sequence of the alphabet. I can sing it though. Getting lost easily, and the list goes on. All of those are part of dyscalculia. Then there's dysgraphia, which I also deal with. Dysgraphia primarily is difficulty in putting words on a page. That is, difficulty forming sentences on paper and can involve poor handwriting. For instance, I know exactly what I want to say in my head, but when it comes to getting it from my head down to the tablet, that's where the disconnect is. Now, I share this with Agatha Christie, and it was very heartening to learn that her dysgraphia and dyslexia was so bad, she had to dictate all her stories to her secretary. So us dysgraphics are not alone out there. Then there's dysphonia. Dysphonia is difficulty coordinating the sequences of the muscle movement of the mouth, lips, or tongue, resulting in slow or difficult to understand speech. There's auditory dyslexia. Auditory dyslexia is difficulty understanding the spoken word. And again, it's like I mentioned earlier, dial-up internet in a high-speed world. See, for those with auditory dyslexia, speech comes too fast to assimilate the words and understand what's being said. Then there's dyspraxia, which I had a little problem with. That's the lack of coordination in muscle movements. It's as if the brain isn't always sure where their body is as it moves through space. The result, being clumsy and accident prone. And I won't tell you about my accidents, so I'll spare you that. So as you can see, there are a lot of complications and challenges that can go along with dyslexia and its sibling conditions, from severe to mild.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys just giving us like very basic overview here, especially for those of us who are not immersed in this every day. I really, really appreciate it. So I want to get into some of the heart of the connection or the discussion about dyslexia and the literary arts. One thing I really love about you all, and one of the reasons I'm so happy to have you three as panelists, is that you don't think of dyslexia as something to overcome, but rather something to be celebrated and embraced. I'd really like to hear about this perspective from the three of you. Why celebrate dyslexia? What are the strengths that people with dyslexia bring to the table? And perhaps I'll turn to you, Jasmine, since you are the executive director of Celebrate Dyslexia.
Thank you. Well, I can go on and on. These strengths can apply to many different people, but what we see the trends in with dyslexic people is that they're creative, they're good problem solvers, and these are not necessarily things that you get graded on in school, but they're things that matter later on in life. They're marketable skills that are very needed in every field, no matter what field you go into, being able to see the big picture and how to get there and solve whatever problem you have, instead of getting lost in the weeds and not really sure how to get out of that. So we can't say that every dyslexic thrives in this, but this is definitely a general strength of dyslexic people. Why celebrate it? Because no matter if you're dyslexic or not, everybody struggles with something. And especially because dyslexia is exacerbated in the younger years of a child's life, where they are really developing their self-image and understanding more of who they are, it is really important that we don't kill their soul in the process as adults. And so that's why it's so important for us, instead of drowning in this, how are we going to get our kids to get through school, really circumventing that a little bit, not ignoring school, not ignoring their accommodations or their challenges, but training ourselves to really allow them to thrive in what they do naturally, whatever their likes are. Allow them to explore it, allow them to become who they were meant to become, instead of going through drill after drill after drill that really won't meet their needs in the long run, in terms of math facts, for example, or memorizing spelling lists that really don't stick with a dyslexic mind. That's why to celebrate it, so that we can really enjoy this process with our children and build a community of other people to know that we're not alone and that we are all facing similar struggles, especially as we're raising our children through the education system that we have today.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I wholeheartedly believe that. And that was creativity, problem solving, the innovation is very much needed today. That was the premise behind how dyslexics will rule the future, especially when we're looking at artificial intelligence and automation and everything that's going about. You know, nothing can match the human brain when it's in the full creativity mode or innovation. And dyslexics are just, for the most part, I've yet to meet a dyslexic that wasn't, you know, highly creative and innovative. And, you know, it's like, you're going to need us because we're going to be the problem solvers, the one that's, you know, going, especially here with, you know, pandemic, you know, we're the ones that are come in and say, have you thought about this? Or even for the future. And I think it's needs to be said with companies, because, you know, it's interesting. A year and a half ago, it's like, you know, when I was working on the book, every single consulting company out there, from McKinsey to Booz to D&T, all the guys are like, oh, we need creative people. We need all these brilliant, creative, innovative problem solvers. And I'm like, well, hey, you know, just come over here to the Dyslexic Center. And what's interesting is how they all want these types of people, and yet they tend to not know where to go to find us. But then at the same time, most, you know, 50% of the dyslexics that are adults, we're starting our own businesses or we're doing our own thing already. So I think it's very important. I totally agree with Jasmine. It's like, you know, I told my son's teacher, my son he and I both have the dysgraphia. I mean, we've got everything that Dawn listed. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Toss in a little bit of ADHD in there. You know, I told my son's teachers, look, I'm going to sign off on his, all these homework things. I'm not going to make him do it. I mean, why torture him? I'll let him go start a business. I briefly homeschooled him, you know, and then he started a business, did something else. It's like, you know, why go through this, you know, component, you know, especially what she was saying, when we know where our kids are going in the future. You know, if you go back and look, most, you know, we're very innovative, creative people. So I think it's extremely important.
That number is amazing. 50% statistic, you said.
There's a study out of London. I can't pull her name. I'm having word retrieval problems, but it's the Cass School of Business. I'm just really looking it up at this point. But yes, there's a study that they've done here in the US and over there in Europe that it averages between 40 and 50% of dyslexics that they surveyed are entrepreneurs.
Wow, that's just incredible. I'll try to get that study from you, and we can send it around afterwards. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated, amazing. Dawn, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's so important, especially the younger your child is, to be able to embrace it as a parent, to understand it and help your child to understand it and embrace it early on. I think one of the superpowers of a dyslexic is something that they develop sooner rather than their peers, because life requires doing hard things, and that is grit and determination. With that grit and determination, which dyslexic children have to learn early on to be able to make it through the hard days of learning, they can succeed in anything. And by keeping a positive attitude, by embracing it, by having the social and emotional support of the parents and educators, there isn't anything a dyslexic child can't accomplish as they grow up, or anything that they can't do. So I definitely celebrate it and embrace it for that reason.
Thank you. Yeah, I also encourage anyone who's listening. I know, Dawn, you've talked quite a bit about social emotional learning, and it sounds like that's a really important part of your advocacy, and I would imagine, Jasmine, yours too, with young kids. Thank you, guys. I want to ask you a question specifically about writing. So if I could turn to you, Tiffany and Dawn, you're both successful writers, obviously. You both have dyslexia, as you've talked about. I'm wondering if you could talk about what particular strengths being dyslexic has had for you as writers. So how does dyslexia, for example, inform and inspire your literary and creative work?
I'll go first. Dyslexia, the creativity. As an adult now, I can't imagine not having the dyslexia. I wouldn't give it back. Because when the dyslexic brain is in its full creative mode, it is awe-inspiring because it flows. I can't even put it into words. It's not even like a runner's high. It's like you can't even capture it sometimes. And so when I'm writing, it's like it's flowing so fast, and then I'm writing, so I have to go back and, you know, back into the dysgraphia or whatever I'm doing. But I do a lot on the keypad. But it's just amazing, the creativity and how stories just pop up. Like I can just walk outside and see something, you know, happen, and I can come up with a story. Like there was a lizard in my garden that was near a cricket, and I thought, oh, what about, you know, this cricket, the story about this lizard and how he couldn't get up the stalk of this plant. But, you know, Miss Cricket explained to him, yes, you can, but he was concerned that he couldn't. So there's this whole story that evolved in my head within minutes about showing how the people or the little insects could help each other. But at the underlying theme was how you can't let fear keep you from doing something. So the dyslexic brain, the stories just come about. Same thing with the poetry. I'll be writing something and it just comes out, you know, and it's me kind of trying to capture it. Is like Dawn said, that's more the struggle, is like, oh my gosh, I got to see if I can capture it very quickly because it's so fleeting. You know, you won't remember what just kind of came through your mind. And so that's where I would never trade the creativity that I have from the dyslexia, whether it be problem solving, intervention, or even writing. But yes, I've been writing since I was in 4th grade. And so, you know, you just get a, you know, Grammarly, I mean, thank goodness for those guys. You just have editors, you know, trust me, I spent 3 hours to hunt down one word before because I cannot decode it all. So, and sometimes I may sound like a sailor trying to figure out a word, you know, just simply spelling fuel. And sometimes it's the little words like wind, fuel. You know, you'll sit there for days trying to figure out, oh, is that with an F? What is it? So yeah, it makes for interesting writing. So I tend to be by myself when I do it.
That's really fascinating. I was going to ask you when you started writing, if that was something you came to or something you had always done.
I've been writing a very long time. So I've got children's books. I have lots that's waiting to be published. So it's my outlet. That's why I love books too. You know, it's kind of a combination of both.
It sounds like since you were young, you've been able to sort of marry those writing and dyslexia and use them to produce amazing work.
I think when you're young and you're dyslexic and you're having a really tough time in school, which I did not get any accommodations until I was a junior in college. You create stories as an escape. Mm-hmm. And I've talked with other dyslexics that are highly creative that are writers too, that you have to have an escape to stay, okay, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to be okay, where you're self-advocating. Mm-hmm. And so I can remember lots of times that I would just start creating stories in my mind while I was in school, just thinking, okay, I'm listening, I get home and start writing or do something. And so it was a way of self-motivation as well. Keep me saying, okay, we can get through this. We can get through this. And so that's where the birth of all those stories came about.
Wow. Thank you. Dawn, can you tell us your story?
I think the biggest advantage of being dyslexia as an author is being able to see the big picture. I have lots of story ideas in my head. And I have over the years. My problem has always been getting at what's in here down on paper, and that's where you have help to be able to do that. But yeah, the being able to see the big picture, see the characters, the settings, the emotions, being able to you have all that going through your head. And sometimes it starts out with just a little idea. I remember thinking, remember that old story, The Tortoise and the Hare? Well, it popped into my head many years ago. What about a hairpiece, the tortoise and a hairpiece? And then I started thinking, well, why would a tortoise be wearing a hairpiece? And from that, I came up with a little picture book, The Tortoise and the Hairpiece, that had a very positive message about self-esteem. But it's being able to see the big picture and be able to formulate all of these story ideas. And then when it comes to getting them down on paper, don't be ashamed to get help and ask for help. You know, I have plenty of help. I have a marvelous editor that without her, I wouldn't have had these stories down, or not very well anyway. And so, but I think that is the biggest advantage is being able to see the big picture in things.
Fascinating. Did you also come to writing at an early age?
Oh, definitely not. It was such a painful thing. I couldn't formulate sentences when I was younger. Whenever I would have a test that required me to write out the answer, you know, I was just I was out of luck there. Usually I just ended up skipping it, or I tried to figure out maybe 2 or 3 words I could use to get by, and I'll go to the multiple choice questions. I just couldn't form, with the dysgraphia, I couldn't formulate my thoughts. Now, if I could verbally give them, that would be great. But we didn't have accommodation or the understanding back then. It wasn't until I was an adult that I actually began to think in terms of writing creatively, starting with poetry. And then from there, it just kind of advanced.
Oh, this is really fascinating, and it's interesting. I'm actually seeing some parallels with other writers who talk about using writing as a form of escape from challenging circumstances, or else harnessing those challenging circumstances to allow them to be more creative. And it sounds like there's some overlap with other circumstances, which I find really fascinating. I'd like to just ask a very practical question. What are some practical ways we can make reading more accessible for dyslexic people, both at home and at school and in the workplace and community spaces?
So if I could jump in on this,
Please.
audiobooks have been huge for my kids because they would really like to keep up with what their peers are reading, but it's too much. The older they get, the more advanced their reading level is of their peers. So being able to listen to them. Movies have been great. Plays have been wonderful. Personal experiences, getting to visit historical sites and have that multi-sensory opportunity to experience the sounds and the sights and the smells and the feels and everything. It really internalizes the educational experience, so that, for example, we're here in San Antonio, when they talk about the Alamo, my kids, instead of reading about it, have experienced it. And that really leaves a lot of impact. It's very impactful for them. Museum exhibits. I love that you keep mentioning the literary arts, because there's so much to the arts that is so important in education, especially for a dyslexic, that really gleans from all of their life experiences and applies that to whatever they're learning. So I think just all those things combined really do help a dyslexic learner.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about the literary arts. It's really important for us at Deep Vellum to talk about literary artists, not just as people who are writing the text, but also illustrators, book designers, cover artists, editors, everyone who goes into the making of this piece of art, and to think not just about a novel, but all different forms of writing.
Right. And I think graphic novels have really taken off in the past couple of years, but those are also a lifeline for my kids, because it isn't as text heavy. They can glance at something easily and understand what's being said. So there have been great things that are popular now that are actually very beneficial for a dyslexic learner.
Thank you. Don and Tiffany, I'm really curious to hear from you guys as well about practical things we can do.
I think that just what we're doing now, if almost like if in a corporate setting, if they would videotape like infograms, I've listed that in my book. We do really well. It's like, that's why we never look at the instructions from IKEA. We just look at the box. It's like we're really big on graphics, looking, that. But I would say too, like right now, as we've been doing this whole Zoom thing, when I'm on a Zoom meeting, I'm actually I'm reading people's mouths. I'm looking at the whole body, because it's not just me hearing the words like Don says in the audio processing. I'm gauging the whole body. My son is asking for accommodations. He's like, look, robots are okay, but I can't do that. I gotta have the person there. And I think that's even sometimes with the reading, if you're in a corporate setting or if you're in a personal setting, that we have to kind of see here, even kind of with Jasmine, it's that whole experience that we're taking in for us to digest, because we're visual thinkers. So it's almost, if you could animate a book and have someone talking or doing something in an animation, like if you took Dawn and had almost the characters where they're talking, I'm thinking about even putting a visual book together, saying, how would you even make this, three-dimensional, so you're talking and hearing it in multiple ways, because I'm actually reading your lips at the same time. So from reading, that's what, I was talking in How Dyslexia Will Live the Future. I think we're even going to redefine reading and education and literacy, because we're going to move into such a virtual world that, reading will be in a different context, so to speak, be virtual. And our kids may not even actually have to write anymore. I mean, everything will be virtual. Even the spoken word will then, maybe replace the written word. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see the future. How much is this going to shift?
That's amazing. And I can imagine even just in the short term, now that we've moved away from phone calls in some respects to more video calls, it must really have changed your personal experience with communicating with folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like you can see your facial expressions, because that's what dyslexics will sit there, because we go off our gut. We read people so fast. It's like, oh no, I don't have a good gut. Never mind. It's like, we're taking in so, like right now I'm watching Dawn, and so you're taking it all in, but it's hard to explain that to other people that, look, I just can't have it in one like frequency. Dyslexics need like the whole radio station, or maybe the whole symphony for us to decipher it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear the cymbals right now. Yeah. Both Jasmine and Tiffany both mentioned some things that I was thinking of. Audiobooks, wonderful. Graphic novels. Comic books were really easy for me to read when I was younger, because they were so, I could read a comic book all day. Being able to provide a means for children that struggle with reading to be able to read, even if it's in a different format. The explicit multisensory reading instruction is so important, and so many schools don't teach that way. They still teach the standard way of reading and writing, which over 50% of the kids just don't learn to read that way. And so I think by having as many multisensory means of being able to take in the written word, audiobooks, accommodation, text-to-speech is another thing that is very helpful. But the important thing is that children do learn to read, because without being able to read, they're going to be handicapped the rest of their lives. And so it needs to start as early as possible.
Thank you guys so much. I have one more question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for the last few minutes. I'll turn to Jasmine for this one, but I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts. We are facing a very unusual school year, as you've already mentioned. Most students will have some form of online instruction, and this could last for a really long time in some cases. Could you talk about the pros and cons of online instruction for dyslexic people, and maybe talk briefly about some of the ways to improve online education for dyslexic people?
Well, I think it depends on every child. Every child is different. Every teacher is different. What I have noticed with my children is a lot of the classroom distractions are gone. So when they do have time with the teacher, even if it's with the whole class, but when it's just the teacher teaching, they don't have their focus. They don't have all the outside distractions. So that has been a definite plus. They can work at their own speed because they aren't necessarily sitting in a chair the whole day. What I've noticed about the way our district has done online learning is that out of an hour class, for example, they'll take the first 20 minutes and teach, and then the rest of the time they can work on their assignment and have interaction with their teacher if needed based on that assignment. So I think that has been a plus for my kids. One of the negatives that I'm hoping has been solved in the fall as opposed to the spring, because let's face it, nobody could have anticipated what happened in the spring. So this is not a criticism, this is just noticing what happened in the spring. Is especially for my middle schooler, Monday would be one subject, Tuesday would be the next subject, and he really needed that interaction daily with his teachers on all subjects like he would have in school, not just math one day a week and not be able to touch base with his teacher and really get that one-on-one verbal interaction. So I think that at least in our district, they have fixed this problem for the fall, and it really is more of a set daily. He has interaction with all of his teachers, which has been fantastic. I think ultimately everybody's doing the best that they can with the situation that we have right now. So I'm sure if I really wanted to be harsh, I could criticize, but this is so unprecedented, and we're just grateful that they still can have some sort of education moving forward until there's a more permanent solution.
Always ends with question marks these days, I think.
Yeah.
Tiffany or Dawn, would you guys like to add to that?
I'll add what my son's going through with A&M. You know, the spring semester, he was a senior. They pretty much just made sure that they were just checking in. They literally just gave the seniors kind of not so much a free ride, but like, you know, Jasmine just said, I mean, it's not like you wake up every day into a pandemic. And so, you know, they had them do some things. But I noticed last week when I was down there, you know, helping him at A&M, it'll be curious to see on his classes, because Brandon, you know, needs to be in a classroom setting. He's mentioned that a couple of times. You know, how well the professors are going to keep them engaged. I do agree with Jasmine, the distractions have gone away. He's going to have to be more responsible being and sticking with the classes. He said one professor was going slower, which was nice, so he could keep up. My biggest concern is going to be his math class, because he has the dyscalculia, and he always likes being able to go up after class and talk, and that engagement or to ask questions. And I think that's going to be a little bit trickier when you're remotely doing it. You know, math to me still has to be live, you know, when you're working out math problems. So I think that one's going to be, I'll be curious to see how that plays out. So, but the history works fine. But I'm thinking the more technical classes, you know, I'm thinking you're going to lose something in that. The other thing I would be concerned, you know, I can only imagine if my son was in 7th grade when he was in the MTA program in our school district. I mean, a lot of the kids that are in the younger grades, they're not going to have the opportunity to go meet with their dyslexic groups. He made amazing advances in MTA in 2 years. So you've got to think about all the kids that are getting that one-on-one or that small group intervention in these school districts. You mean, I don't know how, because again, I'm now removed. I don't know how they're doing that now. So that would be my concern too, is these kids could lose that advantage.
I think it's really dependent on every school district and really even every campus. It varies so much. I do know that those that were on top of it before are really making strides to be on top of it now, but there is only so much that you can do over a screen and not in person. So again, it's really difficult for me to criticize at this point, just because this is so unprecedented and everyone is really just trying to do the best they can in the situation that they have. But you're right, there are some kiddos that were in the process of being tested for dyslexia, and that got cut off. Maybe it didn't get finished. They're not really receiving the services that are so critical in their development because they didn't get their identification. And those are things that are really tragic at this period of time. But I don't think anyone could have anticipated COVID being a household term.
Yeah, I also, you know, adding to that, because this is so unprecedented, and this is all new for kids too. They're not used to this. That the social and emotional support, being able to help them with their feelings, allow them to be able to discuss them with you, and to be able to talk to them. That's even more important going through this. That the social and emotional support is ongoing.
Thank you guys so much, especially for kind of brainstorming these things in a totally unprecedented situation. I'm sure you're having conversations every day about what this will look like. So I really appreciate it. We have a few more minutes left, and I'd like to open for Q&A and if anyone has questions, drop it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. I'm looking through our comments, and thank you guys so much for this great conversation that's ongoing. Do we have any questions? Let me check through here. We have some really wonderful comments. Any questions from the audience before we talk about giveaway?
We'll even take some answers too, if anyone has those.
Well, I will say something from our side, which is that we are very thrilled. We are going to be able to come out with some audiobooks upcoming very soon. We're in the process of recording them. So for those of you who don't want to pick up the paper copy of the physical copy of our books, we will have audiobooks very soon, which is really exciting. Actually, one of our most exciting books recently, Above Us the Milky Way, that's by Fawzia Karini. I believe she is now done recording. The author herself recorded it, and it will be available soon. We'll let you guys know. We'll let you guys know as soon as possible. Any other questions before I announce winners? Let me check this book here. Well, I really appreciate our panelists and our audience members today. This is really wonderful. And I'm going to check my text messages because Sarah, my colleague here, sent over our random winners. So we have, and again, Dawn has contributed 2 books and Tiffany has contributed 2 as well. And I will follow up with each of the winners individually for addresses and mailing information. But we have Patricia Gaffney, Mariana Senor, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's names. We have Kara Mowry and Tasha Miller, who I believe is no longer with us, but we can be in touch separately. Thank you all so much. I'm really happy we were able to do this, and I really look forward to being in touch. Thanks to everyone.